All right, let's dive into this. We're taking a deep dive into sales today. Based on the book you all suggested, How to Master the Art of Selling by Tom Hopkins.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
It really is.
Okay.
Covers everything from prospecting and handling those tricky objections all the way to closing techniques.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really cool about this book is it goes beyond just the tactics.
Right.
It gets into the psychology of selling.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so effective. He's not just telling you what to do. He really tries to explain the why, which is, I think, what makes people connect with it and makes it stick with you.
I totally agree. Like, it's not just about becoming some slick salesperson. It's about understanding people and how they make decisions.
Exactly.
So let's start with some fundamentals here.
Okay.
Hopkins talks about these 5 basics of selling, prospecting, qualifying, presenting, handling objections, and closing.
Mm-hmm.
And he says out of all of those, qualifying is the most crucial.
Yeah, he really stresses that.
Why do you think that is?
It's about making sure that what you're offering is truly a good fit for the person you're talking to.
Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
You know, it's not just about checking if they have a budget. It's really about building that relationship, understanding their needs, and ensuring that it's a win-win situation. You know, because if you're selling them something that they don't need or that's not right for them, it's not going to be good for anybody in the long run.
Yeah, you want them to actually be happy with what they're buying,
Absolutely.
not just make the sale and then, they end up regretting it later.
Right.
So once you've qualified a prospect, he talks about the power of questions.
Yeah.
And he uses this term tie-down questions, which I found super interesting.
Oh, yeah. Those are really effective.
Yeah, what exactly are those?
Well, think of it like this. Instead of just coming right out and asking, do you want this product, which can be kind of intimidating and might get you a quick no, you ask a series of questions that kind of lead them to that decision. Like you might ask, you want something that's reliable, right? Or wouldn't it be great if this could save you time?
Okay, yeah.
So you're getting them to agree to these smaller points, kind of building momentum towards the big yes.
Like a really, really clever way to do it.
Yeah, and it feels much more natural and less pushy, too.
Well, as long as you're doing it ethically, I could see how it could feel manipulative if you're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. And Hopkins is very clear about using these techniques ethically. It's not about tricking anyone.
Right.
It's really about framing those questions in a way that highlights the genuine benefits. And he even cautions against using some simple questions that we think are fine, like, may I help you?
Why would that be a problem? Seems polite enough.
It's a closed question, it just invites a quick no. Instead, he suggests using open-ended questions that encourage the prospect to really share information, like, tell me what brings you in today, or what are you looking for in a product like this?
Yeah, I can see how that makes sense. You're engaging them in a conversation rather than just trying to push a product on them.
Exactly, and that makes a big difference in how people respond.
It's funny because as you're describing this, I'm like, oh, these are good communication skills in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just sales.
Right.
This is how you talk to people.
Exactly.
So that's one of the things I love about Hopkins' book.
Mm-hmm.
It's like these principles are so universal.
They really are.
Now let's move on to closing techniques, because this is where Hopkins he shines.
Yeah, he's got some great ones.
And he tells this story about a salesperson who lost a deal simply because they assumed they knew what the customer needed.
Oh, assumptions can be dangerous.
It's so true. Like, I remember that time. Well, never mind. But anyway, how does Hopkins suggest we avoid making these assumptions?
Well, he talks about this idea of closing on the buyer's positive stimulus.
Okay.
Basically, you need to focus on what the buyer has expressed they want, not what you think they need.
Got it.
And he talks about using these things called test closes.
Test closes. I've never heard that term.
So imagine you're selling a car and the customer seems to love the features.
Okay. Yeah.
You could ask something like, would you prefer the leather or the fabric seats?
Yeah.
You see, if they answer that question, they're mentally moving towards a purchase.
They're making a decision.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just a subtle way of gauging their readiness before you go for that final close.
I like that. But of course, Hopkins is really known for his power closes, right?
Oh, yeah, he has a whole bunch of them.
Like 16, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Maybe we don't need to go through all of them, but could you give us a couple of examples just to illustrate his approach?
Okay, sure. There's the Benjamin Franklin balance sheet close.
Okay, that one sounds interesting. How does that work?
It really taps into people's desire for rational decision making.
Right.
So you literally sit down with the customer and you draw a pros and cons list.
Oh,
So they can visually see the benefits weighed against any potential drawbacks.
I like that. It makes them feel like they're in control of
Yeah,
the decision-making process.
exactly. And it kind of eliminates that feeling of being pressured, you know?
Right.
Another good one is the reduction to the ridiculous close.
What is that?
It's all about reframing the cost. So instead of saying, hey, this software costs $50 a month, you might say, that's less than a daily cup of coffee for all the organizational power it gives you.
That puts it in perspective.
Right.
Yeah, and suddenly it doesn't seem so bad.
Exactly.
I can see how these clothes, they really are rooted in psychology.
They are.
He knows how people's brains work.
He does.
All right, this is making me rethink my entire approach to sales.
Good.
But what about when prospects have objections? How do you deal with that?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. And that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
Perfect.
So stay tuned.
Can't wait. Okay, so we're back and we're talking sales. Diving deeper into this book, How to Master the Art of Selling.
Yeah.
Last time we were talking about how Hopkins emphasizes qualifying the prospect and asking the right questions,
Right.
which is, it's so key.
It is. Yeah.
But it seems he really wants salespeople to kind of think differently about the whole process.
Yeah.
And he goes even deeper with this idea of objections.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people see objections as roadblocks,
Yeah.
but he sees them as opportunities.
Yeah, he does. He really flips that on its head, doesn't he?
He does. How so?
Well, he sees objections as this chance to really understand the customer's concerns.
Oh, yeah.
To provide more information and to really solidify the value of what you're offering.
So it's not about, arguing with the customer.
Right.
It's about understanding where they're coming from.
Exactly. And he even suggests a few specific techniques for handling these objections.
Okay.
One is called putting the shoe on the prospect's foot.
Okay.
I love this one. It's so clever.
How's that work?
So let's say a customer says something like, your delivery times are too slow.
Okay. Yeah.
Instead of getting defensive, you could respond by asking them, well, if you were in charge of our deliveries and had to make sure everything is done right and on time, how would you approach it?
Oh, wow.
It's kind of brilliant because it forces them to think from your perspective.
Yeah.
And it shows that you're open to their feedback.
You're not just dismissing their concerns.
Right, exactly. Another good one is questioning down,
Okay.
which basically means breaking down a big objection into smaller, more manageable parts.
So, for example,
Let's say someone says your product's too expensive. Instead of just trying to justify the price, you might ask, well, what aspects of the price concern you the most? Is it the initial investment, the monthly fees, or is there something else? You're trying to figure out what the real issue is.
you get to the root of it
Exactly.
instead of just trying to smooth it over.
Right. And by breaking it down, you can address each concern more specifically.
I like that. So it seems Hopkins is all about uncovering those underlying motivations and addressing those directly.
He is. It's all about understanding the psychology behind the sale.
It really is. Now, what about prospecting? That's often the most dreaded part of sales.
Yeah, it can be. But Hopkins has some really cool ideas about that too.
Like what?
Well, he's a big proponent of referrals, of course.
Okay.
And he has this really unique technique called thank you on the business card.
It's a mouthful.
It is, but it's so simple and effective. So every time you meet somebody, whether they buy from you or not, you write a personalized thank you note on the back of your business card.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It's such a nice touch, and it makes you stand out.
It's memorable.
Yeah, people are more likely to remember you, and they're more likely to refer you to others.
So you're making a real connection.
Yeah, it's not just a transaction,
Right.
You're building a relationship.
You're showing gratitude, too, which is always a good thing.
Absolutely. And speaking of building relationships, Hopkins provides some really valuable advice for those actual conversations with prospects, whether it's over the phone or in person.
Okay. So let's start with phone calls, because I think a lot of people get nervous about those.
Oh, I know. I used to. But Hopkins suggests having what he calls a call formula.
Okay.
Now, it's not like a script, It's more like a framework to make sure you cover all the important points, like building rapport, uncovering their needs, and ultimately trying to secure a meeting or closing a sale.
Okay, so you have a structure, but you're also flexible.
Exactly. You need to be able to adapt to the conversation. And he stresses the importance of confirming all the details so there are no misunderstandings later on.
Yeah, that's key. Now, what about face-to-face interactions? Those can be even more nerve-wracking.
They can be, but Hopkins breaks down the initial meeting into 6 specific steps.
Okay, lay it on me.
All right, so first, there's the obvious, smiling, introducing yourself, shaking hands.
The basics.
Then you thank them for their time, offer them a business card, and then, wait for it, you let them settle.
Let them settle. What does that mean?
It means you give them a moment to relax and take it all in.
Oh.
Let them observe their surroundings, collect their thoughts before you jump into your pitch.
Ah, so you're not just bombarding them with information right away.
Right.
You're giving them space.
Exactly. It's about creating a more comfortable atmosphere.
That makes a lot of sense. It shows respect, too.
It does. It shows that you're not just there to make a quick sale. You're actually interested in building a relationship.
This is really making me appreciate that human element of sales.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just about pushing a product, it's about connecting with people.
That's really at the heart of Hopkins' approach.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've built that rapport, we've presented our product, but the customer still has objections.
Right.
How do we navigate those tricky waters?
That is the million-dollar question, and that's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive.
Oh, the suspense.
Stay tuned to find out how Hopkins suggests overcoming those objections and ultimately closing the deal.
Can't wait. Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Tom Hopkins and his How to Master the Art of Selling.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. I mean, this book has completely changed how I think about sales. It's so much more than just closing deals.
Oh, absolutely. It's about understanding people, building relationships.
Exactly. And we left off last time talking about handling objections, which Hopkins, sees as opportunities.
Right.
But how do you turn those objections, those opportunities, into a path toward closing the deal?
Well, the first thing to remember is that not all objections are the same.
Okay.
Some are genuine concerns, things that really need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And others, they might just be smoke screens masking the real issue.
Hey, how did you tell the difference?
Hopkins suggests a technique called questioning down, which we touched on a bit before.
Right.
It's about getting to the heart of the matter. Like if someone says, I need to think it over, you don't just leave it at that.
Right.
You dig a little deeper. You could ask, what specifically are you unsure about? Or is there something holding you back from making a decision today?
Okay, so you're not letting them off the hook?
Exactly. You're gently guiding them towards identifying the real obstacle so you can address it.
I like that. But what if the objection is totally valid? Like a budgetary concern, for example.
That's where Hopkins' idea of closing with empathy really comes into play.
Empathy, okay.
Yeah, it's about being honest and upfront, acknowledging those limitations,
Okay.
but also exploring creative solutions together. So maybe you offer a payment plan
Right.
or a scaled-down version of your product or service,
Yeah.
or even suggest some alternative resources if it's truly not a good fit.
Wow, that's a far cry from the old always be closing approach.
Yeah, Hopkins advocates for a much more consultative style.
More human.
Exactly, where you're genuinely invested in helping the customer find the right solution, even if it doesn't lead to an immediate sale.
It's about the long game.
It is,
Yeah.
building that trust and goodwill. And speaking of long-term thinking, Hopkins also talks about nurturing relationships beyond that initial sale.
Okay.
He introduces this concept he calls itch cycles.
Itch cycles. I've never heard of that. What are those?
So it refers to the natural time frame when a customer might be ready to buy again or upgrade. Like if you sell cars, most people replace their vehicles every few years.
Right, yeah.
So by staying in touch with your past customers, maybe offering some helpful information or service reminders, you position yourself to be their top choice when that itch cycle kicks in.
Ah, so you're turning a one-time transaction into an ongoing relationship.
Exactly. And that's where those thank you on the business card referrals can really pay off too.
Yeah. You're building a whole network.
Right. A network of trust and goodwill.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into the world of sales.
It has.
It's amazing how Hopkins combines psychology and strategy and genuine human connection into a complete approach.
I agree. And what's so powerful is that these principles, they go way beyond just sales.
That's what I keep thinking.
Yeah.
It's about effective communication, understanding people's motivations, and building relationships that benefit everyone involved.
Absolutely. Whether you're negotiating a salary or pitching a new idea or even trying to convince your kids to eat their vegetables, these ideas can help.
So much wisdom packed into this one book. If there was one key takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember from our deep dive into Tom Hopkins, what would it be?
I think it's this. Sales, at its heart, isn't about manipulation or tricking people. It's about building genuine relationships,
Mm-hmm.
understanding people's needs,
Yeah,
and providing solutions that truly improve their lives. And that's a philosophy, I think, that can really empower us in any area of life.
absolutely. Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, from qualifying prospects and mastering closing techniques to handling those objections and building those long-term
It's
relationships.
been a great discussion.
It really has. And we've only just scratched the surface of what Tom Hopkins has to offer in how to master the art of selling. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and some practical tools to take your sales game to the next level. And hey, even if you're not in sales, remember those principles of empathy, understanding, and genuine connection, they apply everywhere. So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those conversations going.